Hello everyone, and welcome to session 2 of How to Be Okay with What's Happening Now. In session 1, I talked about why we're not okay with what's happening now and how that's directly related to the difference between how we experience things and how we want to experience things. And I shared that that was my basic definition of stress. I mentioned our tendency to blame our negative internal experience on people, places, and things, instead of recognizing that it's our own unmet expectations, assumptions, and preferences that are to blame for our negative mental and emotional reactions. I proposed that by including a regular meditative practice in our lives, that our habitual reactivity to life could be gradually replaced by mindful responsiveness to what's happening, and that meditation was an internal happening that arises independently of specific activities. And I invited you to recall melting into a loved one's arms and experiencing the sense of loving support, connection, safety, and peace that relates to the experience of deep meditation. I briefly mentioned how our mental and emotional triggers are often intentionally targeted by people, corporations, religions, politicians, in order to get a desired reaction and to influence our behavior. In fact, advertisers, politicians, and news agencies rely on triggering an emotional response in us. And with all of the advanced ways that they are gathering information about us, it's getting easier and easier for them to press our buttons. The teasers for the news programs used to say something like, "Your children may be dead by morning. Tune in at 11 for the full story." Most of you probably know what it meant to tune in at 11, but for you youngsters in the audience, just replace "tune in at 11" with "subscribe to my podcast to find out why." This is the basic concept behind any type of clickbait. Just give a little bit of out of context information to get their mind and emotions going, and then allow that reaction to get them to do what you want them to do. I also introduced 3 words from yogic teachings that describe the practice of meditation. Pratyahara, the redirection of our normally outward flowing senses inward. Dharana, contemplation or concentration of attention on an object or phenomenon. Dhyana, the happening of the meditative experience. And mantra, a repetitive phrase or sound that's used as a powerful tool during the meditative process. In our live session, one of our participants mentioned that he was paring down his consumption of social media, and I want to say that his choice of words were quite appropriate. In Ayurveda, the yoga science of natural health care, the concept of nutrition involves not just food, but all of the sensory information that we take in or consume. The sights we see, the sounds we hear, and the information that we absorb are all considered in the term nutrition in Ayurveda. So, are the sights, sounds, and information that you're taking in nourishing you or detracting from your health? Satsang is comprised of the word sat, or truth, and sangha, which means coming together. So a satsang is a coming together of truth seekers. That's what we're doing here. Another term, prana, refers to our life energy. Chakras refer to the energy centers in the body where multiple channels of flowing prana cross. The model of the 7 main chakras refers to locations in the body associated with major nerve plexuses, endocrine glands, organs, and most importantly, levels of consciousness. The 6th chakra, or third eye, located between the eyebrows, is a common point of focus during meditative practices. I find the chakra system to be a wonderful way to conceptualize how body, mind, energy, and spirit all work together to create an individual's experience of life. Kundalini is another word I mentioned, and it's said to be a latent evolutionary energy stored in the 1st chakra. that, when fully activated, rises up the spine, through the chakras, to the crown of the head, and leads one to an experience of oneness with God and all of creation. Now, for this session's new material, first, I'd like to go over the general theme of each of the following sessions and how they form a set of tools that you can use in any moment where you're experiencing stress or mental and emotional upset. I learned this methodology from my guru many years ago, and it is breathe, relax, feel, watch, and allow. When we catch ourselves reacting to something someone said or didn't say, did or didn't do, or when we're just not getting our way, instead of giving into our natural habitual reactions, our response can be to connect with our breath, to relax in that moment, to feel our bodily sensations, to watch life as it's unfolding, and then allow things to be as they are. Breathe, relax, feel, watch, and allow. This little phrase has helped me so much over the years. Initially, we will be using this technique in our meditative practice, but as you become more familiar with it, you will remember to use it in your everyday life in a practical way. Because in reality, when someone pisses you off, you can't just sit down on the floor and meditate. Well, I mean, you could, but that would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? So in a moment, I will be talking about how to use the breath when we find ourselves in reactivity. But first, I want to expand on some of the things I spoke about in the first session. The mind, which in this context I consider to include both our thoughts and our feelings, can be a wonderful tool when used properly. But the majority of people operate primarily in relation to only two aspects of it: the memory and the imagination, the past and the future. We strive to recreate the good things that we've experienced and avoid the bad things we've experienced in the past. And then we project ourselves forward in time and imagine what we need to do in order to get what we want and not get what we don't want in the future. Most people spend every bit of their time on earth doing just that. And intrinsically, there's nothing wrong with living this way, but it doesn't get us anywhere, and ultimately, it makes us swing from happiness to sadness and from joy to despair. When we give circumstances the power over our mind and our actions, we become almost zombie-like, habitually acting and reacting and reacting again. And as our likes and dislikes mount up, the window of acceptable circumstances gets smaller and smaller, and so our lives become smaller and smaller. We lose our ability to adapt, to change, to grow because of our dislike of the new and unfamiliar. And ultimately, we end up spending the majority of our time trying to control external circumstances so that our internal environment is pleasant and unchallenged. Can you relate? Take a moment and think of how you might be trying to control people, places, and things around you so that you will feel better inside. Our memory and our imagination can end up taking us over. Such is the nature of the ego mind, the collection of likes and dislikes and desires and fears and memories and dreams that really make up our personalities. We often carry these impressions just below the surface of our conscious mind. We may have no recollection of our grandmother's homemade bread and be completely unaware of why we crave sourdough so much when we're upset. The ego mind is constantly engaged in managing our circumstances so that we get pleasure and avoid pain. Now, to some extent, that is natural and normal. especially when it comes to our physical needs. But too often the strategy gets overblown and we perceive that our entire well-being is dependent on having things the way we want them. For instance, saying that you're going to move out of the country if your contestant doesn't win the popularity contest. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with this way of living. It's just a question of whether or not it's working for you. If this life strategy of grasping and avoiding is getting you where you want to go with what you want to have, and you're happy and fulfilled, then by all means stick with it. But I suspect that that's not the case, since you're here learning about how to be okay with what's happening. Now, on to our discussion of the breath. The breath has a unique quality of being a bridge between body and mind, and one directly affects the other. When our mind is agitated, concerned, worried, we have a tendency to breathe more shallowly, more rapidly, or even to hold our breath. When our minds are calm and quiet, our breath tends to be slower, deeper, and more steady. The wonderful thing is that when we consciously choose to have our breath be slower, deeper, and more steady, the mind responds by becoming calmer and quieter. And our body responds too. Muscles relax on the exhalation, our pulse goes down, our blood pressure drops, stress hormones like cortisol go down, and feel-good neurotransmitters like serotonin go up. So, if we can catch ourselves when we first get triggered, we have the opportunity to intervene in the stress response by becoming aware of breath and intentionally breathing more deeply and slowly. This is the first step towards being okay with what's happening. Conscious breathing is a powerful tool to interrupt your habitual way of reacting to circumstances. The breath is your constant companion in this life, and so, in any circumstance, you have the opportunity to breathe consciously and even to do so in a way that is barely perceptible to those around you. By taking slower, deeper inhalations and then directing them lower into the lungs, down into the belly, and by letting exhalations be even slower and more complete, our body responds by relaxing, and our mind responds by slowing down and becoming quieter. Now, let's talk about what it means to have a quieter mind. You might say, well, isn't thinking less a bad thing? My response is that all depends on the quality of your thoughts and whether or not you're choosing to think or just doing it habitually. Last week, I mentioned the Eckhart Tolle quote, "The ability to stop thinking is a terrible affliction." Generally, the more thoughts we are having, the lower the quality of those thoughts. But fewer thoughts, interspersed with moments of mental quietude, tend to be more meaningful than those erupting out of useless mind chatter. In the last session, I mentioned Patanjali's 8-limbed system of classical yoga and his Yoga Sutras that describe it. I introduced you to limbs 5, 6, and 7, Pratyahara, Dharana, and Dhyana. Now, I will tell you about pranayama, or breathing practices, which is the 4th limb of Ashtanga Yoga. The word pranayama is composed of 2 parts: prana, our life energy that courses through the body and mind and drives all of our actions, and yama, which in this context means control or restraint. So when we practice pranayama, we are learning to control our prana, our life energy. It is said in the yogic tradition that if you can control your breath, you can control your life. So in just a few minutes, we'll be going through some more breathing exercises, ones that you can do while you're meditating or while you're out and about in the world. Namaste, y'all. The light within me salutes the light within you.